And for an analysis of the situation in Afghanistan, a member of the board of directors, Afghan-American Chamber of Commerce, Doug Brooks, joins me now via Zoom from Washington, D.C. Good to have you join us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So let's look at all that has played out from the time that President Trump entered this peace deal to the peace deal itself, the peace talks itself, and now to what we are seeing in Afghanistan. What does this tell you about the willingness of Afghanistan to share power from the very beginning? Of the Taliban, rather, to share power?
Yeah, well, it's been a long road, as you can imagine. Every president has sort of said that they want to get out of Afghanistan. But the reality, there's been a lot of development in Afghanistan. There's been, Afghanistan is a changed country. And now we have the Taliban coming in. Originally, the Taliban were talked about sharing power. That was under President Trump, but it doesn't appear they really meant to do that. They simply played that card for a while, and now when there's discussions about sharing power, of course, the Taliban are forget it. You know, we're in charge now. So I don't know if this is a country that's ready to go back to the Taliban. We're starting to see some signs of resistance around Afghanistan, which is kind of interesting. I don't know. It's a crazy situation right now and depressing.
And when you look at the press conference from the Taliban, talking about how they will respect the rights of women within the law, as long as it's within the ambits of the law, and women can share power, women can be part of the government. That sounds like, people say that's probably the Taliban 2.0, but it also almost looks like a group that is looking for legitimacy, because they have right now the vacuum of legitimacy, and where there is no legitimacy, there is no power. Do you think that that's what's playing out right now?
It was an interesting press conference. It was all sunshine and roses, and you know, who knows? I hope that's all true. It doesn't appear that way from what we're seeing on the ground right now. I think the Taliban is not a monolithic group, right? There's a Doha Taliban, the ones who are involved in the negotiations, who seem a little bit more liberal, a little bit more open to these ideas. There is the Pakistani Taliban, who seem to be a little bit more hardcore Islamists, and then there's various groups in all over Afghanistan. So they never. One of the issues with the negotiating with the Taliban is they never really had a platform, because they couldn't agree to one on themselves. So now they're in power. They have all these factions they're trying to pacify and get an agreement. I don't know if they can do it. It's crazy, and you know, things have been happening so fast right now. I don't think they know what to do.
You know Afghanistan better than most of us. What we're seeing now today, were there signs that this could happen? What were some of the things you saw earlier on that made you? Do you believe that this could have happened, you know, in such a short space of time?
Well, so the Afghan military was actually a pretty good military, and the Afghans are quite good at fighting, including their regular military, their special forces. Their air force was quite good, but they needed support. You can train a military, you can train a soldier and get them experience and everything in a relatively short time, but the logistics side, the support side, the medical evacuation side, all the maintenance, that was all provided for them by the United States and other countries. And as long as they had that support, and as long as the soldiers that were in these remote posts knew that they would get backup or support if they were attacked, they did okay. But when Donald Trump basically pulled the rug out last year or 2 years ago, I guess, and started ending all this support, and then more radically this year under President Biden, it really became pretty clear that these remote outposts were not going to stand. And the Taliban, and the way it sort of works in Afghanistan, is a lot of the combat is actually more negotiations. I mean, if you know you're going to lose, and the Taliban come to you and say, "Hey, we'll let you all go. Just give us your weapons and walk away." And that happened an awful lot, because what's the point of just fighting and dying when you know you're not going to get additional support? Worse, on the political side in Afghanistan, it was a catastrophe. You had a government that refused to negotiate with itself. You had divisions within the leadership, the political leadership within Afghanistan, and that's been going on for 20 years. We could never get them to agree to unify for anything. So that had been going on. President Ghani was front and center, one of the worst in these sorts of things. He just would not cooperate with Abdullah, who was a sort of supposed to be the number 2 person in the government, but he kept refusing to do it. So there was no unity within the political system. So if you're a soldier and you're in the middle of some remote province or district, what is there to fight for? It was a shame because so much had been done. And when the U.S. finally ended, it ended too quickly. The U.S. didn't really, I think the Biden administration could have done a better job of talking to our allies to see if a lot of our support could have been shifted to other Western countries to continue some form of support. But nobody in the U.S. was making the case to say, let's stay in Afghanistan longer. And keep in mind, by the way, the U.S. still has troops in Germany, in Japan, in South Korea. And those are really strong trade partners and allies, but we've been there a long time. And you don't need a whole lot of troops, you don't need a whole lot of risk, and we could have stayed there longer.
And it's interesting you mentioned Germany because the Chancellor of Germany did release she made a statement where she seemed to have blamed the Biden administration for what's going on. She said the reason Germany pulled out its troops was because Germany wasn't going to stay after the U.S. has pulled out, its troops as well. But would it be fair to blame the Biden administration alone? This war has seen 4 American presidents, 2 Democrats, and 2 Republicans 20 years after, $1 trillion after. Should the Biden administration take the blame alone?
Well, keep in mind that the Trump administration had started these negotiations with the Taliban and had reduced the numbers of troops from 15,000, I think, to 2,500. And President Trump himself had said, we want to be out by Christmas of last year, which would have been even worse. The Biden administration came in, but Joe Biden has said from the beginning, basically, that we should not be staying in Afghanistan. So it was pretty clear he was going to do a withdrawal. Now, he didn't just step out of Afghanistan overnight. It took several months. So he did, I would argue, better than Trump would have done. However, he didn't really talk to the allies about what the U.S. was about to do. And he basically informed the allies that this is what we're going to be doing. And that, I think, for the allies, it was not a discussion of equal saying, how do we handle the situation? It was, we're getting out of there and you can stay if you want, but we're not going to be there to help you. It was not good. It could have been done in a much, much better way. I think their response now, since this catastrophe happened already, has actually improved. So the Biden administration is responding better. But a lot of this trouble could have been avoided in a big way. And that's unfortunate. And Biden has taken the responsibility for this. And good for him to do that. But now we have a mess to deal with.
And that looks like a gain for China, for Pakistan, and for India, who probably will be looking for how to consolidate power in that region. What does this mean for the foreign policy reputation of the Biden administration?
Well, I think in many other ways, the Biden administration has been doing okay in foreign policy and certainly domestic policy. This was a big problem. And it's going to take a lot of repairs to get things back on an even keel, I think. The cost to the U.S. diplomatically is enormous. And now everybody is basically having to clean up this mess that the U.S. created. And, you can argue it could have been delayed. It would still have happened. I think it could have been done a lot better. And we wouldn't have this refugee crisis that we're facing. I'm working with a company now. We're trying to get Afghans out of the airport in Kabul. We wouldn't have had, what's probably going to be millions of Afghans that are going to be leaving the country. I mean, we have a whole generation, I call it the NATO generation, that came of age since 2001. And this is a generation that speaks English, they're computer literate, they're Western oriented, they're Democrats, they like democracy. And all of a sudden they're in a 14th century administration, run by the Taliban. They're not happy. And I think anybody who is raising a family in Afghanistan now is thinking, how do I get out of town and get to some place that is sane?
Absolutely. And I have listened to some people who helped the Afghans who helped the military or U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Some of them have been evacuated to the U.S., but with their families still in Afghanistan, and they are really worried about what could happen to their families, especially when the Taliban realizes that they helped the U.S. forces. But we also know that the people of Afghanistan has been through a lot of oppression from the Taliban. This is more like a deja vu for them. So what sort of intervention can the U.S. provide without boots on the ground?
There's a lot of issues here. So the U.S. has been funding a lot of or the West, I should say, has been funding a lot of the Afghan government budget. There is some leverage there, because essentially the entire economy of Afghanistan will collapse without this funding if it doesn't continue in some form. So there's some leverage on this. There's not just the Afghans that worked with U.S. military, the translators and interpreters, that have a special program, an SIV program, it's called, to immigrate to the U.S. There's that group, but there's a much, much larger group of Afghans that have supported U.S. operations or Western operations in Afghanistan that are essentially on the Taliban hit list, as it were. These are people who work with my organizations, with contractors that have been supporting the Afghan government, the Afghan military field. This is tens of thousands of Afghans and families and so on, and a lot of them are now at the airport in Kabul. They're trying to get across the borders elsewhere. The Taliban has a pretty good idea who these people are and who their families are, and they've been attacking them for months now. And it's quite likely that now that they control things, it's going to get even worse. So yes, we're not just talking about the translators and interpreters and their immigration. We're talking about hundreds of thousands more that could potentially be targets for the Taliban. Now we're hearing mixed stories from the field about how vindictive the Taliban are being towards these people. In some cases, the Taliban seem to be saying, they said, I think, announced yesterday a blanket amnesty for anybody who worked for the government. That doesn't seem to be recognized by all the Taliban. As I said, the Taliban's many factions. Some of them care about this stuff, some of them don't. But if you worked for a contractor that supported the Afghan government in the past, are you going to take that chance?
And we're hearing today about people being beaten up on the streets, trying to leave Kabul. Thank you so much for talking to us, member of the Board of Directors, Afghan-American Chamber of Commerce, Doug Brooks.
Thank you very much.